To create is to resist. To resist is to create. I'm John Fanning, and this is the Create with John Fanning podcast. How's it going? How are you all doing out there? So this is episode 2 of my series of episodes on creativity based around my book, Create. And the last time I was talking to you, I gave you an intro or an overview of who I am and why I'm doing this podcast. Basically about how, and also about how artists and writers don't own creativity, and how I'm going to use my own experience and the experience of many of the creators I've met to talk about our shared understanding of what it is to create and how to get there. Even when my own experience and the experience of so many creators I've known is very much one of dealing with the difficulty of being a creator. What I call walls. It's, one of the biggest walls being that we're trying to create within a world that values or equates value with capital, not for this idea of art for art's sake, or the opportunity to simply share with other human beings what you've created. So, it's to be, so it's that idea of being a so-called a real artist. You have to be, inverted commas, successful, which means receiving capital. This idea of art as a product, as opposed to art as art and then a product. It's not about the joy of creating or the joy of creation, what I call a door as opposed to a wall towards creativity, not a wall away from creativity. So it's something that you enjoy, so you're in the joy of sharing it, your creation, that is, even if it's only with one person, you know. So last time I said I'd get into family, friends, and villains, but in the interim I thought about it and felt I should get into what creativity itself is as a whole, what a creator actually is, and why it's important to live a creative life as such. So to create is to resist, and to resist is to create. So why did I start with that quote? Well, that's the last line from Time for Outrage, or in the original French, Indignez-vous. And it's a small but very powerful book. It's more of a pamphlet, I suppose. But anyway, it's by a French diplomat called Stéphane Hessel. I suppose, like a lot of books, even small books can be just as powerful as large ones, depending on what they have to say. And this one was published back about 10 years ago, nearly. I think it was like in 2010, when Hessel was in his early 90s. Unfortunately, he passed away there a couple of years ago. That was a big loss. But anyway, so this idea that he had, which was an idea of the resistance fighters in World War II, to create is to resist, and to resist is to create. So it's this idea of when we create, we're resisting the modus operandi of society, in that we're resisting what we're told we are, what we're supposed to be, and then this idea of what we ought to be, to become who we really are, you know. And by resisting, we become creative beings, which is something I feel is one of the most powerful things we can become, like a creative human being, as it just So Hessel, he was a diplomat, but he wasn't an ordinary diplomat, you know. As I said before, that's something from the resistance, that quote. Similarly, it's one that they used a lot. He was a French resistant, and then he fought in World War II as well, and he went into a POW camp, if I'm recalling correctly. And he suffered a lot and he survived a concentration camp and resisted the Nazis. But it's in a sense of he did all that, but he did it with a creative mind. He and the few others wanted to create a new world for future generations, for us, by resisting the powers in charge. So he created a different idea of how the world should be, one against authoritarianism, one of freedom. So a creative world, And then after the war, he was involved with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with Eleanor Roosevelt, which was written and edited in the late 40s. And so his activism refocused the social vision that was created after World War II into one of solidarity and compassion for human beings, which is something that I'm beginning to see a extreme lack of in certain societies. This idea of solidarity. It's actually a word that you don't really hear that often now, or compassion, unless it's the Dalai Lama's talking. But and so that book was this creative idea of resistance, and being who you are and resisting power structures as such. It became a huge thing for Arab Spring. They say it was the inspiration for Arab Spring, his little book, and for the indignados over there in Spain, and then even the American Occupy Wall Street movement, and many other political movements. So that's why I started with that quote, because Hessel's amazing life is an inspiration for many, He was an inspiration for me writing my novel Ezekiel, in the sense that how one person or an individual could envision a better world and have the will to create that reality along with a few others, even against such a huge killing machine such as the Nazis. So that's a wonderful act of imagination, of creativity, to imagine a better world. So from a large overview, that's creativity on a larger scale, or a political one, but very much a humanitarian one as well. And of course, this gives us the opposite of what creativity is too, this idea of destruction. And if you're inspired by destruction, then you burn books instead of writing them, like Hitler did. Or you kill life instead of creating it, again like Hitler. So there's a great irony here too, because the Hitler fellow was a failed artist, So he abandoned creativity. And that's because he was a psychopath, obviously, but the destructive tendencies. But by abandoning creativity, he wasn't embracing creativity in others afterwards, even when he stopped painting or didn't become empathetic. He just started to destroy creativity, destroy books, and then in his manipulative and criminal way, he made an art of destroying people. So he made an art of destruction, as opposed to creating something for others and for himself, So Hessel and those others, they kept that door, yeah. Really, it's a door, yeah, to creativity, towards creativity, open during World War II. By imagining a better, more creative world, unlike the horrible one that Hitler and his friends had created, or imagined. So he and people like him eventually, they helped bring down walls, literal ones like the Berlin Wall, That's like having a creative way of looking at the world, So it's not just literal ones like the Berlin Wall, it's figurative ones too, And the figurative ones are the ones that I'm hoping to talk about more as I get into doors towards creativity as such. And so I suppose I should be clearer on that. Yeah, I see these walls and doors as paths, and that walls are a path away, as I said before, from creativity, and then I see doors as a path towards creativity. And this is really important, because if you're moving away or you're moving towards something, and a door opens towards something and opens out into something, or opens into something, and doors to creativity would be some of the things that I mentioned in the intro, like notebooks and process and space-time, and many others I'll talk about in later episodes, But walls, they would be stuff like school or an education, and then perfectionism, and again capitalism there, and then stuff like what I call lexical prisons, and then trolls and many others, So what's really important is that we have to be aware of what a wall is, and then what conversely what a door is, so we don't confuse one for the other, and so we're aware of what we're walking into or walking through or into. Are we walking into a wall, or are we walking through a door of creativity or towards creativity? And they're very simple metaphors, and I'm very clear, I wanted them to be simple because the simple things are often the most complex things too, so it's an important way of, I think, looking at it and giving an overview of what creativity is. So walls are what I'll talk about in the next episode, one of the walls. And after going through many of the different types of walls that move us away from creativity, I'll get into talking about the ones that move towards it, and how we can transform walls as well into doors, and then how we make doors through those walls, But before getting into that, obviously, today I wanted to talk about the idea of creativity as an idea, because creativity can be a pretty amorphous thing, like love with a capital L as such, this big thing, or concept or idea. It can mean so many different things to different people, and all of which are neither wrong or right. Neither wrong nor right. It just depends on the person's perspective as such. And to me, on a simplistic level, I see creativity as walls and doors, and in the end, windows out into the world. But before I get to the walls and doors and these windows out into the world, I want to talk about this amorphous apex as such of a triangle of creativity. Before I get into what I think a creator is as such, just kind of some general first principles or definition, or work towards some kind of definition of what a creator is. And so probably the first thing a funny thing comes into my head first is this Brazilian artist, because he gave this TED talk years ago, and it stayed with me, and it's always stayed with me. And he's very, as well as being funny, he's pretty inspirational as well, this guy. His name is Vik Muniz, and I can't recall really what the title of the TED talk was. It was something to do with chocolate and sugar and string, anyway, I know that. That was the title of it. And what I'll do is I'll leave a link, or I'll try and do an embed of the video onto my website with the transcript of this episode. But what stayed with me with Muniz is that he talks about creativity, and in a cool way, about how it's a funny story. I shouldn't tell you too much about it, but he got shot, and that was what helped him to get to the US. That's one way of getting here, I suppose. But he has a lovely clarity on the distinction between creation and creativity, and so I can't really paraphrase it all here, so you can look at it in the video, but generally he draws on this pardon the pun there, he draws on this distinction between creativity being how we cope with creation, So while creation sometimes seems a bit ungraspable or even pointless, um, to him creativity is always meaningful, because he sees what we see, like in inverted commas, see as artistically as creativity and what nature or the world gives us, like objects, as creation, which kind of explains inspiration, something I'll get into later as a door towards creativity, in that it's something that we see spontaneously, differently, when others don't see it at all. Hopefully that's clear there. What got me was that he was able to draw this distinction between creation and creativity. So again, creativity being this big amorphous thing, and then creation being this thing that's non-tangible, and it's hard to, depending on who the creator is what creation becomes as such. And there's an English fella called John Berger, who he's dead now as well, unfortunately. He was a pretty cool guy. But anyway, yeah, he was an art critic and a novelist too, and he used to talk a lot about the way Muniz does about seeing. And he had a book actually. It was called Ways of Seeing. It was a TV series as well on the BBC, I think it was. I don't think they had Channel 4 back then, but anyway. And the point being that he says that in the book and on that show, he says that the process of seeing itself is it's kind of less spontaneous and natural than we tend to think of it or believe it to be. And because he compared what we'd call stillness and the silence of a painting, like just looking at a painting, the stillness of that. What is its essential essence as such, as completely different and divorced from well, I think he called it religiosity, of what people teach us about art, so we're again conditioned, to an extent, in how we see creativity and creation, and this link between creativity and inspiration is a distinction that we make for ourselves between both, as well. So again, it's a pretty personal perspective as well. So other people could have different perspectives on what that is, So it would seem that creation is where inspiration lies, and all those other cool things about doors into creativity. Inspiration being a big one, but which I'll get into later. Not creativity itself, which is the larger world of creation itself and everything that's in it, and these kind of references are things that I'm thinking of, like inspiration, or another thing that would be kind of a door or an awareness of creation would be connection, or what Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly, I can't remember his second name, I can never get his second name, but his book is called Flow, just like the word flow there. And so it's an experience that every creator talks about in some way. And it doesn't matter if you're running, if your creative way of being in the world is to run, well, then you can arrive at a flow state. And that wonderful experience, which is creative people, all creators feel and experience, it happens when you're in this zone, this flow state, where you lose yourself, you lose awareness because you're in the moment. And when you're in the moment, you just forget about what's around you, the noise, um, the mental craziness that our ego creates and all that. So you lose awareness because you're in the moment, and you get away from this sense of time and space, because your brain's chilling out, and because it gets relaxed, it gets reflective, and then because you're focused on the pleasure of something you're passionate about, it makes you feel good and makes you feel healthy. So that guy, in that book Flow, I think he talks a bit first about the mind, so that the connection, it starts as a mind thing, and then it becomes more of a connection to the whole world around us as such. So we're creating, and the creativity would be the world around us. And when your mind makes those connections, whether they're unrelated things, they come together, and we imagine new ways, like Al Hessel there, new ways of communicating and seeing the world, and because we're doing that, we're full of a force of life, of healthiness and flow, and that stimulates our mind, and later, and then after the mind, our emotions and feelings. Again, other stuff that I'll get into later on. But if you think of creativity from a societal perspective, it would be that getting inspired and being creative is not always seen as a positive. Oftentimes it's frowned upon. Yeah, it was kind of like when we moved to France from New York, and started to set up an inverted commas business that focuses on exactly that, focuses on creativity and giving people a space and space-time to get inspired and be creative. People look at that and go, well, this guy's off his head, he's mad. And they don't necessarily have to say it, but yeah, you felt it fairly quickly when you told people why you were going to where you were going. And then the idea of it being first and foremost always this idea of a business perspective on it, and business is all well and good, but sometimes it's not about the business, it's about why you're really doing it. And so you get these negative kind of viewpoints that of never making enough money to support your family, you're going to starve and all that, and stuff like that, and so you can't blame people for their skepticism, and and it's not as if we knew what a business plan was all those years ago. It's nearly 20 years ago now, and they just didn't understand, Unfortunately, those discouraging or potentially discouraging comments came to us when it was far too late for us to be discouraged, because we wanted to create a world, and we were locked into that. Like Hessel, we were trying to create a different vision of what we thought or think life is, and how we create it, and to create a creative world. And that was to create a retreat, albeit in the middle of nowhere, in the Black Mountains down in South France. And so we just did it, we kept creating our retreat and life in France. And as opposed to the skeptical way of looking at it and thinking that support your family and all that, which is very important, we were doing it because we believed in it, because we trusted we were doing what we were doing was the right thing to do. And and this it's not just running a retreat that happened, that this kind of skepticism about leading a creative life or trying to be creative with how you live your life, on this kind of meta level of creativity as such. That kind of language, I heard it, many times. I've heard it many times throughout my life, and growing up as a young fella in Meath, that's where I come from in Ireland. This farming county, just north of Dublin. Beautiful place, a lot of spiritual stuff there, huge megalithic tombs and Newgrange and all that stuff. It's a beautiful place. But the kind of language I heard growing up there as a young fellow was, the idea, why bother, why bother, and so, and that's actually exactly what an Irish relation said to me. He shall remain nameless as well because he's still alive. But I don't hold that against him for it. But he said that to me when I got a prize for winning an essay at school. I was only, young, but he wasn't being mean. He was just clueless. And to him, it was a useless thing to do. To create an essay. Why bother doing that? Who cared? It's not as if he's going to read it. And so my response was basically something like, maybe you're right, yeah, oh yeah, something like that. I was 13 or 12 years old or something like that. And what I really wanted to say, if I'd had the words and knowledge or some kind of a different kind of language, some kind of language about creativity or an insight into creativity, it would have been something like like nothing. Nothing has ever been achieved without creation. Whether it's, essays or ideas or like any kind of creative leap. Anything that's, anything. No, well, there's nothing has been created basically without creativity or creation. And the future will always be with these creative leaps. Because, if we're to survive and in the face of all this, climate change, or it would have been global warming back then, or in the face of stuff like population explosion and nuclear weapons and this existential threat, getting all the more nearer to this doomsday clock, people don't talk about that though, our survival will depend on our passion and intuition to create things that we haven't even imagined yet, and it's the people that create those solutions. That's the imagination, that's creativity. So it's when people are writing an essay, they're opening the door towards creativity, and if you're opening a door towards creativity, then you're imagining a different world. And it's only people who are trying to imagine a different world that are going to create solutions. Whether it's in business or politics or, how to stop nuclear proliferation or pollution. And I suppose also I would have said to him that it's existential. Just like an existential threat of nuclear proliferation. But the creation itself and creativity is existential. People need to actually create, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you have to be creative to actually and have an imagination if you want to do things differently and go at things differently. But I was 13, so I told him he was probably right or something like that. Anyway, yeah, I knew he was wrong at the time. Intuitively, I knew he was wrong, but even I didn't know how to. I just didn't know how to respond to him, And that's often the time, that's what I call about lexical prisons, it's not having a language of creativity. I'll get into that later again in a different episode, but it would have been cool to be able to give him examples, because if you think about it, everything from maths and space travel to writing novels to falling in love, cooking a bloody meal, to planning a vacation. All of that takes a leap. It all takes a creative leap. It all takes imagination. Can you imagine? You're imagining a new world with somebody different. You're imagining new ways of mathematical ways of looking at things, or new ways of having to travel through space, or how to write a different type of novel. So it's this leap into the unknown, out of the quotidian, this mundane existence of, boulot dodo, as they say in France or in Paris, work and the day-to-day vicissitudes, So it's a leap into the unknown. And all of our myths and symbols, they all come from creation. The creation myth in the Bible. It's like there's so much. Our sciences, our philosophies. It's like the Big Bang, that's where it all started. Yeah, or is it God in his 7 days? It's like, and in the sciences, is it quarks? And it's just generalized way of looking at it. It's what makes us different from all the other species on this planet. So creativity is extraordinary. It's a very important thing to harness as an idea and a way of looking at the world and living the creative life. And if you were to ask, if I was to ask physicians or mathematicians or about this, they'd say that they don't rely just on logic, alone to arrive at some kind of new science. They'd tell you that imagination's also the key to making these new leaps. Quantum physicists and string theorists after them, they were inspired by their imaginations to create new visions of reality and science, and someone like Einstein, he would have never came up with what he came up with if he wasn't making these imaginative leaps, and like his special and what was the other one? The special and general theories, of relativity. If he wasn't trying to be creative, he would never have come. If he wasn't thinking differently and creatively, he would never have come up with them. So he's trying to see things differently, So this is really important. And if we don't have creation, if we don't have it, we're done, So that's why it's important. That's why I'm doing this podcast, That's why I think it's so important, And if we can't imagine new ways of doing things or imagine new ways of living, then we're lost, So it's an extraordinarily positive thing, and it's an existential thing, and we need to do it. It doesn't matter what we're doing, in some way we need to do it to create. So it's one of the most significant things or forces on this planet, and presumably on the other planets, I haven't visited them yet, so I don't know, but so like I said in the first intro, the first episode there, we're all creative beings, we're all creators. And if we bring this into our lives, we make this planet here a better place. It's the only planet we have, so we gotta try and make it a better place, a more creative place. And I completely trust this, just like Hessel did, and Muniz and all those other people I was referring to. And if you start living a creative life like an Einstein or whoever, it has an effect on you and on all those people around you, on the people who love you, because it brings joy, the joy of creating, and then the joy of living creatively. It brings you a joy of being alive and of being in appreciation of what surrounds us and what inspires us. So I don't know how long I've been going on now, but I'm going to keep going about I want to get into talking about a creator and why a person creates, like why do I create, why am I writing or creating this podcast, why did I leave Ireland for Manhattan, and how did I end up living in a rural southern France, married to an American, welcoming all these creators from all over the world. Because, as I said before, I trust my drive to create, and I trust the drive to create of everybody. And I say trust because trust isn't a belief, because beliefs are created by other people, mostly by people we've never met. It's like Blake once wrote, I must create my own system or else be enslaved by another man's. I've always loved that quote. I think it was the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. But I trust creation, not dogmas created by others. And that's the joy of creativity. We can create our own worlds, our own systems, like Blake said, and it's not belief systems, but systems. that we trust. So it's kind of like what Jung said. I don't believe, I know. So that's knowledge, is trust. And there's another story that just started coming into my head about these people. Anyways, it's in the 90s in London, you know, which should give another perspective on what creativity is, at least to me anyway. You're wondering what the hell's the 90s London got to do with that. Well, before I founded La Muse, and even before I was working in magazines in New York, I managed a pretty cool bar in a pub in Camden Town in north of London, you know. It's called a Good Mixer. And it was when the Brit-pop 90s was going on in London. The bar's still there too, but I haven't been back there since it became under new ownership. But I think it still looks the same though. But anyway, when I was at the bar, or in that pub, I was managing that pub, we had all these fruit and veg guys coming in, the sellers and the bar boys from down the street and out front of the bar, and old age pensioners. Just going to get a glass of water. Excuse me. Pensioners, and they all came from this mad spike down the road, you know, that Orwellian thing. He described it down in London and Paris. There was one right down, the last one was right down the road. But anyways, this eclectic, mad mix of people, like mods and all types of sellers from the market stalls up at the Lock up in Camden, and people from all over London, as well as people who had record labels. One guy, a really nice guy, he had a band called Blur, which was one of the big bands back then, them and Oasis. But it was a mad place and a lot of fun, you know. And the place was, as I was saying, it's this amazing mix of eclectic people, all really creative, you know, musicians and artists and producers and sound engineers and journalists and musos and groupies, and everybody connected with all that kind of creativity, you know. And they were all from all around the world. And in behind the bar with me was a load of Kiwis, or what you call New Zealanders and Aussies, and we'd be sitting we'd there in the bar serving people, and you get like 10 Japanese teenagers coming in, and they'd all sit around, they'd buy one Coke, and they'd sit in front of that one Coke for 2 hours, watching all the sellers and playing pool and waiting for a glimpse of somebody like the guitarist from Blur or something. And it was, it was a bizarre, and it was that kind of bizarre stuff was always a regular occurrence in there. And I suppose that's what happens when you get a lot of creative people around. You know, you have these really funny things happening. But the thing I found in talking to any of the successful creative people in that pub was that they were simply doing what they loved. You know, that was my lesson. You know. They were playing music, they were writing about it, they were producing it, they were mixing it, but they weren't doing it to make money. You know, that'd be a nice byproduct for a lot of them, but they're doing it because they loved it. So some of the bands would get like lucky and get real famous, and some of them were well known for a few years, and others were dropped after their first album. Especially the ones that were taken on as tax write-offs, you know, by the big labels, you know, and I think they called them boiler bands back then. You know, and so you'd have bands that make it big in England, and then you'd have them, and then they'd be unheard of in the States, and then you'd have bands that nobody knew in England, and then became famous in the States. So that's the way with all creative industries. It doesn't matter if it's the publishing world or the film industry. Nobody really knows what's going to be successful, inverted commas successful, you know, or where and when, or even though they say they do, you know, they all say that they know like what's going to hit and what's not. I mean, you got these extraordinary musicians that don't make any money, and then extraordinary filmmakers that don't make money from their art, and then so again back to the lesson though of that period of my life was that those musicians and all those other creators, they just didn't care. You know, they they just want to make music and have fun and get drunk with other people on the same wavelength. It didn't mean they weren't professionals about what they did. My God, they were like mad about getting the sound down correctly and getting really good lyrics and writing good articles and stuff like that. But they were doing it because they loved it and they were having a lot of fun. They were inspired, and that was one of my first experiences of coming across that in growing up, like after college. I had a bit of that in college, I met some creative people and stuff, but not to that extent, It's a mad bar, and a mad time. So, there I was it took finishing 2 degrees, getting my master's degree, and then to actually find out something that was relevant to me as a creator was going serving booze and alcohol to all these fun people, Like it's a worthless resume building exercise, but it was better than sitting in an office cubicle. Better than an MFA, I suppose, but I didn't even know what an MFA was back then, we didn't have that kind of cottage industry that they have over here in the States, where you go and get an MFA and that's how you get your stuff out there, We were totally clueless of that over in Ireland, at least back then in the 90s and stuff. And a lot of the musicians that came into that bar, they couldn't care either, It was they were just doing what they loved, So that's the lesson, You can have fun doing what you love, creating what you love, and you can even make money at it sometimes. And sometimes you can actually make a lot of money at it, if you're a business person about it and you get lucky, But the success comes with the doing. That's the most important lesson about that I got in London. Anyway, it's the fun of creating. Not with it. It wasn't about getting a load of money, which not to denigrate getting money and needing and wanting to get money as well. You have to, after your product's done, you got to try and get it out there. Something again that I'll talk about much later on. And so that's another way of looking at it. It's like doing what you love, and creativity from a broader perspective, and I'll get back into that later on as well. But I kind of want to do an episode on doing what you love, But another thing on the perspective of creativity, and looking at it as this kind of world to enter into or move towards, opening a door towards it. There's another story when I was back here in Maine, actually. It must have been about 10 years ago or so. I met this lady, and she just dropped her last kid off at college, a while before that. It was a month or a week or so before that. And she'd always wanted to write short stories. Before she had the kids, she was writing short stories, but then life happened, And of course, I was there telling her she should take advantage of her newfound freedom and go to a writer's retreat. I was running a writer's retreat, so I was meeting women like her all the time, who'd had some kind of creative impetus, or they were inspired to create something and then stopped doing it because, they were being caring mothers and wanted to take care of their family and weren't making money from doing their creativity. So I said, when I told her to do that, she kind of just looked at me and she went, I wouldn't know how. She kind of mumbled it out, I was like, what? And then she said something like, I'm not a real writer. I'm really not that creative anymore. And I was like, my God, just had a lot of compassion for her standing there. But I was like, at the same time, they're standing on this old colonial house on the veranda or whatever they call them, and wraparound porches, that's what they call them here. And she has this amazing flower garden outside the front of this beautiful house that she'd renovated. She did most of the painting and stuff. And not only that, out the back she had this mad organic kitchen garden, that she'd created. And I kind of looked at her and I just went, well, if you're not creative, then neither am I. And then she looked at me and she she said, what do you mean? You write novels, she said. And, I just said, you just create 3 kids. That's pretty creative. And you create this wonderful house with this mad wraparound porch. And look at your mad gardens out there. And we're just after eating this awesome meal, I just said, each one of those things is highly creative. She looked at me again, and she was kind of confused, very confused this time. And then there was this little smile that came on her face, and she went, I'd never thought about it like that. And again, this is mad. It's like it's the idea of creativity and how we look at it. And that there's so many things that we do in life that are creative. And that we don't even see that they are, and that brings back that perspective I was saying about creation not being owned by artists and writers. Everyone has it in them. It just depends on where we're putting it to work. And when you're a child, all you ever do is create. It's called play, and that's something I'm going to talk about later on as well, a different episode. But so creation is this way of creativity is this way of embracing new personal worlds. Whether it's making music like those guys in Camden Town, or building, or designing, or mending, or painting, or gardening, or engineering. Yeah, it's like gardening like that woman in Maine, So the list is endless, and if you think you're not creative, it's because you haven't found out what it is you love creating yet. That's just it. It's simply that. And it doesn't matter what it is, And every retreat, like over and over again, for nearly 20 years, I'd come across this, I'd meet people from all over the world that had this existential need to create. They left everything behind and went to this little village in the middle of nowhere in these mountains in the south of France to create. And they're still going there, irrespective of whether I'm there still or not, because we created this space, this safe space for people to create. And that's beautiful, because it's allowing people with that need to make themselves feel good by creating, and the process of it. So some of the creators that have come, they've never written a word before. So they're going into new creative worlds. Some of them never painted before. And when they went there, they'd hook up and meet up with other people who were famous or really well established. Some were old, and some were young. Some of them were just out of college. Like that lady from Maine, some of them were just after dropping their kids off at college, So some of them were the heads of colleges. And so they all had the same thing in common, this need to create, the need to be a creator. And I think it's a basic human need, and that's the thing, As soon as we're born, we're told who we are, Oh, this is what you are. And a lot of time by people who don't know who they are. That's the irony of it, isn't it? And so this problem grows, and it consolidates its case, And it's something like what that lady said, I'm definitely not creative. No, that's other people are, the people making the movies. Oh yeah, those people, the people acting in them, or the people writing them, or even the people creating the billboards. They're more creative than me. Well, I got one response for that. That's a bloody lie, It's just not true. It's a damn lie. And I feel strongly about that, because society is constantly killing creation by making us think we're only one thing, Nobody's one thing. We're many things. The world is large, and it's and so is each human being. We're vast, we're not just one thing. You can be a mother and a writer. You can be a gardener and a painter. You can be a businessman and a pilot. And you can be a writer and a flautist. We're many things. And the most important is, one of the most important things I feel is being a creative being. Human beings are creative beings. And creation's how we bring what's inside of us into being, That's what makes us a creative being, or a human being. You can just be a human. If you're not creating, you're kind of just being a human, really. So if it's just about, getting loads of money and stuff, well, that's not being a human being. That's being a human, and being a human being is being a creative being, So this idea of creativity, and that it's only for so-called professionals, people that make money from what they do, from how they create, and that's how you get how you qualify to be a part of the creative class. It's kind of, you can almost see this class thing, which I'll get into much later, about capitalism and stuff, or so that those who make money from what they create is they're the ones that are the creatives or creators. Sorry, that's wrong-headed, and not only wrong-headed, but it's insulting. It's insulting to Van Gogh. He painted only one painting that got sold. Does that mean that he's not a creator? He's not, because he's not selling art. He's not a professional. I'd say he's one of the greatest professionals that ever lived, when it came to his art. So I think that's what I wanted to say about, or mostly what I wanted to say about the overview of the creative world, or creativity as a world, but then there's also the distinction to be made here about within that world of what a role of a creator is, and what the role of a creative is, and how they differentiate. It's important to make a distinction, and I suppose the best way to think about that is, or to talk about that, would be to give another example of someone that I met on retreat. This really cool Scottish lady that I met on retreat. She was coming for 2 retreats actually, but anyway, I was just after telling her that she wasn't a creative. Again, this distinction between a creative and a creator. And she wasn't very happy about it when I said it to her, I think she thought that I meant that just because she wasn't making money from doing her art, that I was being insulting. But she didn't take it personally too much, but because then she asked me to explain it, what do I mean when I say she's not a creative? And we were in the truck, and it was about 7 years ago, I'd say now, and we were going down to Carcassonne. That's this town, with this mad fortress and all that, one of the biggest medieval fortresses in Europe. We were going down there to get groceries from the retreat, and down the mountain. And the woman, she was a bit of background. She was an ad executive in London. And she come on retreat. She had this awesome line that she said. She'd come to draw the line. And I said, draw the line on what? She said, on the paper. And so she meant that she was going to draw without taking her pencil off the paper, So she said this is a really cool exercise for learning how to draw, and just allowing flow, that thing again that flow book talked about, to get connected to her hand, to her creativity, and she's an awesome artist, by the way, so she mightn't have been selling her art or putting it out there, but her art was amazing. But by day she writes copy. So she's a writer, a professional writer. But that's not what she sees herself as professional, as a creator. She creates ad copy, but it's not who she is, you know. Simply who she is. Again, we're all vast, and so you can be many things and create in many different ways, you know. So the reason I'd said to her she's not creative is because she's calling me a creative, and she was calling herself a creative, and she's calling everybody on the retreat. She'd say, well, you're creatives like us and stuff like that, you know. So she was using it in this kind of thing as like we're all creatives. And at the beginning I didn't want to correct her because I didn't want to come off as some kind of, you know, a-hole, you know, or some kind of mansplainer as I just met her. But as we were starting to get a few laughs, I got into it, and that's why I came up with it, you know, or said to her that she's not creative. And by way of explanation, I said to her it was that she's a creator or a co-creator. She's not a creative when she's doing her art and stuff. She's only a creative when she's not only a creative there, but she's a creative when she's at work. And she said basically that's the same thing. And I said to her, no, it's not. And when she asked me to explain it, she's well into the definitions. I basically said that, you know, creatives can be people who live life creating walls, you know, again, that walls thing, to creating. Or they could be people who are creatives for other people, like her when she goes into work in her job, you know. And that we need co-creators. So when she finishes her drawing, I then become a co-creator by appreciating what it is that she's drawn, and then get a feeling and I become transfixed by it, or I really appreciate it, and it makes me feel good by looking at it. So internally, co-creator is on a level of appreciation with that lady drawing the line, you know. And you're a co-creator when you appreciate and respond to someone else's creativity. So she was into that. But then she wanted to know what a creator was, and I just simply said it's just people who make things, you know. You know, they create, they crochet, they paint, they sing, they repair cars, they write novels or imaginative business plans, or they draw the line like her, you know. So she kind of then she said that something like so you're saying society's co-opted creative by making us think it's the same as creator and co-creator. And I was like, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And because creative has been capitalized on, you know, there's that word capital again, and capitalized on. It's been capitalized on by the corporate world. And again, as I said before, I'll get into that when I talk about capitalism more. Not to digress into that, but what I said to her was something like, she's a creative, and you're a creative, and the graphic designers that she works with are creatives, but you don't necessarily get positive co-creation from, or creation for that matter, from doing that work. And so some people do, though, and they're creators when they're at that work doing the same job as her. So they could be creators doing what she was doing that she wasn't into doing, because they're into it, because they love it. But she loved drawing. She didn't mind her job, you know, she's really good at it, but it's a distinction, a personal distinction, depending on our perspective and what it is that we're into. But, you know, companies want an audience, and they want to turn us into consumers and have this passive relationship with creativity. And why? So we buy their products. And why do they want us to buy their products, or why do they not want us to be creators? Because then we're making the products. Because a creator is somebody that makes something. So creative is a really kind of sneaky word, you know. It's a sneaky way of blurring the distinction between a creator and a co-creator. And that's why I think it's important to make those distinctions between the two of them. And yeah, it was a funny conversation, but she smiled at the end and we had a good laugh. She called it a well-tidy idea, you know. I think in Scotland that's what you mean when you say it's something good. They say it's well-tidy, you know, or so. So she said anyway. So this word creative, just like the word creativity, it's kind of been stolen. It's kind of been robbed, like either by academic programs or theories or science, especially commerce, you know. And I'm sure if I met that Scottish artist now today, she'd talk about the advertising of creativity. Like creativity, inverted commas, literally the word on the sidelines of, you know, major football matches. You know, I think it was even during the World Cup they had creativity, and then it was a bank. A bank. Oh, okay. So they're creative. Well, I suppose you could say they are, but if you want to be creative, you got to go to this bank. Okay. And so, yeah, so it's a different way of looking at these words, you know, and it's important to have these distinctions so that we're clear on aware of where we're going and what are walls and what are doors to our creativity, you know. You know, I had an old drama lecturer. He used to say he would see it the same way too, you know, that if you're a co-creator, then you're in the audience, you know. A creator would be somebody that's on the stage, you know. Like that word drama actually means to do, to act, you know. So a creator does or acts, you know. And like the actors on the stage, they're acting, they're doing, and they're doing something that they love, obviously, or presumably they love acting, and that's how they get creative. But audiences, they watch and they absorb. But that doesn't mean they're not being creative in some way. They're co-creators. So it's a different level of creation, I feel. You create empathy with the characters on the stage, but you're not creating the character. You are, in a sense, in your own imagination, but it's co-creation. Not the same way as an actor is creating it on the stage, or the playwright when they had to go into the zone or into that flow state to create and get inspired to write the play. So you're a co-creator when you enjoy and appreciate the play on the stage, and it can inspire you then to become a creator, to write your own play or to act in one. And so you're in the audience, you're a co-creator most of the time when you're experiencing that play. You could be a playwright sitting in the audience, but right then you're not creating a play. Well, maybe you're taking notes or stealing some of the dialogue, but you know, so it's a fluid way of looking at it, but yeah, it's just have those distinctions. And then you could see somebody in the audience who's writing a really nasty that's creative destruction again. Nasty article about the thing, criticising the play, but almost for the sake of criticising it. And you know, you come across people like that. Give a few examples of that in other episodes, but you know, they get their kicks from being kind of mean-spirited, you know, towards somebody who's putting out something, but or trying to create, you know. And I'd call that a creative negator, or a creative, just a creative negator. You know, they're not co-creating; they're distancing themselves from what somebody's essentially trying to give to the world, and being averse and negative, creating walls. So a co-creator can have wonderful ideas, but doesn't bring them into the world. You know. For the rest of us to see or experience. They could be sitting there watching a play and going, oh, I want to create a play, but then they don't actually move forward through it, because there's a lot of work as well. They don't move through for the rest of us to experience like a creator does. And like, so the creator acts on their ideas. And as I keep on saying, it's not about creating a play. That's just the idea of to kind of get the idea of the distinctions. But you could be creating software, you could be creating a book or paintings, but you can also be creating a company. They're co-creators who have become creators, become actors in the field. They got up onto the stage of the world or view or field that they're in, and they created. So they climbed out of the audience and started telling the audience about their play, about their business plan, about their design, about their project. So, and so wouldn't it be great to be an actor too? To become, in some kind of Shakespearean way, to become the part, to live it, to write it, so others can enjoy what you create. Wouldn't it be great to be a creator, because we are, not to be great to be a creator. Again, you are a creator, everyone's a creator, but it's, we have to have the courage to then move forward into it and move towards it and open that door. And there's many ways to doing that, First you have to have an insight, or inspiration. And if you have an insight, and you see inside yourself, you look inside yourself as to what it is that you love, and you look inside and you bring those things into the world that nobody's ever seen or heard them before, because it's yours to share and your perspective is different. Everybody's different. So, but again, the question comes up, like that relative of mine back in Ireland I was talking about earlier. Why bother? Yeah, why bother? Well, as I said before, like Hessel said, creativity is very powerful, and it's an act. That's creation is an act, and it's a sacred act and a personal act. Even if you look at that word, the idea of sacredness and religious experiences as such, the true sense of that word is to connect, like flow state again. To connect is of that word means again, or to connect. And then Lego, not the bricks, but Lego from the Latin, it means to choose or bond or revere, So ultimately it means to choose again and again a reverential kind of personal bond, and to connect with oneself, So that's religious. And so that's creation. It can be a religious experience. If you in the true sense of what the word or definition of the word is, if we look into the word. So creation is religious because we choose to go over something again and again. We become devoted to creating. And so we reinvent, which is creation. So we recreate ourselves by creating out of ourselves. Now you're going into the inside again, over and over again, because it's never still, it's always changing. And I'll get into all these kind of aspects, change and sacredness and, all these other doors to creativity or towards creativity. So I'm doing this podcast because no matter what you want to create, those doors are possible to open into, and no matter what you're into, whether it's creating a retreat or a publishing house or a business or this like a podcast or, and no matter what you're into, there's so many things we all have in common, the walls that we put up against, and then the doors to walk through those walls, and then those windows out into the world that creativity gives us. And of course the most important thing to persevere, in order to create, because it's perspiration, not inspiration. And that's not me, that's Edison, or even Einstein, I think had a slant on that as well. I think they both quoted it in some kind of way, perspiration, not inspiration. It's hard work, to become the actor, to step into the field of creativity in whatever it is that you love. It takes work, and you have to just do it and continue and keep on religiously, again and again, doing it. And why? Because it makes you feel good. And if it makes you feel good, it makes others feel good. Because there's a domino effect. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. It's to help you guys create, if I can, in some small way, and so that you don't feel alone like I used to. I used to think I was mad, when I was a young fella, like when I was writing that essay, and then you'd have that relation telling you like, yeah, well, you're mad. That's not, a real job, or well, I was a young fella, but it's not. Socially acceptable as such, unless you're becoming an academic or something like that to write an essay, as opposed to just wanting to write something because you're into writing something about an experience you have. So, that not to feel alone, because you're not alone. There's so many creators out there, and so many people creating in so many different ways that are not professional creators, so trying to help. I want to try and help by help you create by not making the same mistakes I did, and so many other creators make, and we all make them, because that's how you learn something, by making mistakes. So we can create something to reflect these needs, these creative needs, and then the unconscious needs from inside, and then the needs which are unconscious of all of us, if you look at it like the universal consciousness as such, or that kind of Jungian thing. And because when we create, the whole world thrives and benefits. It becomes a better, just becomes a more beautiful place. People are happy and healthy creating, then that has a domino effect of positivity, not a destructive one. Going into this lack of solidarity and this kind of destructive kind of a world that a Hitler kind of imagines, And isn't that what most of us want? Don't we want a better world, one where don't we want to create a better world? And that's creativity. If we create a better world for ourselves, we're creating a better world. It's like the Gandhi thing, be the change you want to see in the world, and so you can create that. And you can create that, and that's another thing, kind of an epiphany, well, not so much, kind of an epiphany. You don't need to ask permission to anybody to create. You just don't need to ask permission. You don't need a diploma in building to build a house. Plenty of people build their own houses. In France, there's the amount of people building their own houses. The whole thing. From the electricity, to the masonry, to the plumbing, and then to designing the furniture inside it. And there's many people doing it, but we are told that, you're not a professional, so you can't create it. Like the last house that we lived in, I renovated most of it. Learned electricity, learned all this passive house stuff, and put hemp in walls and built walls, and and you learn it as you go along. That's creativity, so don't let anybody think or tell you that you don't have permission to build or to create or to do whatever it is that you want to do. You just do it, and you learn by your mistakes. Hey, the wall might fall down at the first time, but you learn from your mistakes. You know how to build it right the next time. So we don't have to ask for permission. We just do it. We just build, dance, sing, write, and we do it right now. You don't have to build a whole wall. Just put a few stones. Get the stones ready, and then mix the cement another day, and then start to experiment. Don't want to get too much into the wall idea, but especially when I'm saying the metaphor of walls as things that are stopping us from creating. But Yeah, so that you don't think about what you want the work to be, you know? You just, as a builder or a mason, will grab a stone to put on that wall. Here I go again. But anyway, some of the great masons that I worked with back in France, you know, they would grab a stone, whatever stone it is that they received, and they would put that into the wall as they were building. They didn't go looking for a specific stone. They put the stone that was given to them because they had to be creative in how they placed that stone in the wall. So, you know, so write and paint, play and design, you know, change it, you know, refine it. And someday it'll be ready to be put up on a stage or be part of a house, a wall, or into an album or something. So you have to discover your own need, your own love, your own way, away from this psychology of the many, you know, away from, and the many of being the society, you know, away from, you know, Nietzsche had a great way to explain it. He called it the herd instinct of the individual, or in the individual, I think. And you know, that Edward Bernays guy would be a guy, another example of how society tries to manipulate us into at least the last 100 years anyway, with advertising, and how they manipulate us. And Chomsky talked about that at one stage. He was quoting somebody else, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was how to fabricate the consumer, you know. So manipulating us into thinking that we want stuff that we don't need, and to keep us doing that, to keep us busy so that we're not creating stuff ourselves, you know. So Bernays would have us believe that we can buy happiness, you know. But you can't buy happiness. You know, it's a byproduct of creation, you know. And creation isn't a product, it's a process. So this idea that you'll be happy if you buy this car is very different from you'll be happy if you create the car. You know, Ford Motors don't want you creating your own car, because you're not going to be giving them money for a car then. And if you build your own house, you're not going to be paying somebody else to be building it. But so it's a very powerful thing, creativity. But then this stuff comes in. Oh, but I'm not a mechanic because I can't build cars and all that. Well, if I'd stopped writing, because I wasn't published for many years, I wouldn't have any books finished, you know. But more importantly, I wouldn't be who I am today. It's because by being a creator, by writing and by creating, I found out a lot of things about myself. And if I'm not creating, then I'm missing this huge opportunity to grow. And you can learn so much about yourself by just, you know, going into the frustration of creativity and finding solutions. And then you learn stuff about yourself, you know. And it's very rewarding. And it's important to go open those doors, you know. Go on that path where you know, away from those walls, on that path towards creativity. So thanks for listening. Hopefully I got a bit more into stuff in this on this episode than the last one, the overview. So I started with a quote from that wonderful man, that Frenchman Hessel there, Stéphane Hessel. But as I said the last time, I'm going to end each episode with an Irish proverb. And this one, it literally means whoever doesn't plant in the spring doesn't reap in the fall, which is kind of relevant, you know, to what I've been talking about. So whoever doesn't plant in the spring doesn't reap in the fall. So in Irish it's An té nach goran san arach, ní bhanan sé san bhar. An té nach goran san arach, ní bhanan sé san bhar. So this podcast, as I was saying the last time, is supported by you, the listener. via my Patreon page. If you want to support it and help me get some money for doing it, because that's how I see this podcast as a job, you know. One I love doing. Then head over to patreon.com/John Fanning. That's John with a H and Fanning with 2 N's, like the thing over your head, Fanning, where you can you can get early. This one's not going out this Wednesday, but early on Patreon. But next time I will, and get ad-free access if you've got ads on wherever you are listening to this, as well as extra episodes when you sign up. You know, I'll be putting up readings of some of my novels and some interviews and stuff like that. So if you can afford it, then give me the cost of a price of a cup of chamomile tea or something like that, or a pint of Guinness. You know, they're 2 drinks that I do like. So if you can't afford them, it's grand too. You can just listen for free, but please leave a review on iTunes, a nice 5-star review, you know. And if you don't like it, well, don't leave a review at all. You know, just ignore it. Wherever you're trying to listen to it, you know, there's other places other than iTunes as well to leave those. Click those stars and write a few words. You know, just a few. It doesn't matter how many. So it lets your friends know about it and other people know about it. You know, because people look at stars and all that. So thanks for listening. And if you're looking for more of the episodes, well, there's only one other one so far, but you'll find them in all the usual places like iTunes or on my website at, again, johnfanning.me. johnfanning.me. Under there's a tab there that says podcast, and I'll put up an overview of the transcripts with the links to all the people and ideas that I mention in every episode. And if you're into the social stuff and you're looking to engage with me through that stuff, you can check me out on Twitter at Fanning, FANNING _J, and on Instagram at John Fanning _. And so it's been great sharing stuff with you today. So until next time, take care out there and be benevolent, you know, when you can. Slán live agus Ganari an bóthar live.